won't believe what happened next. A woman whose face launched two of rock's most famous love songs spent decades smiling for cameras while quietly breaking inside. At 80, she's finally saying the quiet part out loud. Was she treasured? Or was she used? Was she a muse or a mirror reflecting the egos of the men around her? Tonight, we're stepping behind the photos, the parties, and the platinum records to hear her story the way she wants it told. Raw, unvarnished, and bravely honest. Settle in, because this one's not about nostalgia. It's about truth. The life everyone thought they knew begins far from the electric hum of a London studio. Pattie Boyd, born Patricia Ann Boyd on March 17, 1944, didn't come from spotlights and red carpets. Her childhood zigzagged with the unpredictability of a military family. Her father's Royal Air Force service uprooted them to Nairobi. Then divorce reshuffled everything again. Back in England, with a new step family, she became the eldest sibling who learned fast how to smile through change. By her late teens, she was a London girl with a big, restless question in her chest. Where do I fit? It didn't look promising at first. She worked as a shampoo girl in a beauty salon. Endless suds, small talk, and dreams that felt way bigger than the mirror in front of her. But London in the early 60s was a city that loved to discover people, and the city discovered her. A photographer's assistant clocked the wide eyes, the unstudied grace, the 60s kind of magic, and suddenly Pattie Boyd was posing for Vogue and Elle and Vanity Fair like she'd been born on glossy paper. Designers took cues from her. The boho but polished look she wore turned into a template other women copied the very next week. She wasn't just modeling clothes, she was modeling a way to be. Then a tiny acting job changed everything. In 1964, she was cast as a schoolgirl in a new film about four lads from Liverpool. You might have heard of it. On that set, the quiet lead guitarist with the shy smile kept looking at her as if the room had gone silent. George Harrison didn't pitch himself like a rock star. He leaned in like a man who'd found something he didn't want to lose. They married on January 21st, 1966, and for a while, it felt like the kind of love people write songs about, because he did. The world fell in love with a melody that the legendary Frank Sinatra once called one of the greatest love songs of the last half-century. Something wasn't just a hit. It became a shorthand for longing, for devotion, for the mystery of a glance that says everything. Another tune, For You Blue, was a simpler, sunnier confession of affection. Imagine hearing that and knowing it's for you. Imagine being 20-something and learning you can be the subject of an art form before you've even figured out who you really are. But attention is a double-edged thing. The moment you become an idea, you risk losing your edges. Early in their marriage, Pattie Boyd gave up modeling, partly to support George Harrison, partly because that was what a good wife did in that world. She went from the buzz of creative rooms to long, quiet hours at home. Meanwhile, George's spiritual life accelerated. He was all in. Indian music, meditation, mantras. It grounded him in a way that made sense to him. For Pattie, it began to feel like a door closing. Imagine hearing that the man you love talk beautifully about transcendence while you're wondering why he doesn't see you right in front of him. And then another guitarist walked in a frame. Eric Clapton already had the kind of reputation that sticks to a person. The prodigy, the virtuoso, the one every other guitarist watched with equal parts awe and annoyance. He'd been with the Yardbirds, with John Mayall's Blues Breakers, with Cream. The guy could make a single note tell a whole story. In the late 60s, he fell hard for his friend's wife, not with a casual passing interest, with a writer's obsession, with the kind of fixation that keeps you awake at 3 a.m. and turns you into an unreliable narrator of your own life. Friends noticed it first. He couldn't stop talking about her. At one point, Pattie Boyd received an anonymous letter signed only E that read like someone had ripped out a page from a fever dream. It was desperate, worshipful, almost mythic. She told George Harrison about it. She tried to stay loyal, but obsession is persistent, and artists do what artists do. They take their feelings and lay them onto music until the ache becomes melody. Which brings us to one of rock history's thunderclaps. Eric Clapton teamed up with musicians who matched his intensity and recorded an album that set a new standard for the blues rock confessional. It drew on a 12th century Persian love story, Layla and Majnun, about a man driven mad by love he couldn't have. And in the middle of that album was a song, Layla, that sounded like someone prying their heart open with a guitar pick. It was raw, depleting, volcanic. The first riff lunged at you. The piano coda floated you down after the storm. The world went crazy for it, and Pattie heard it and knew. That kind of fire doesn't come from nowhere. Now, here's the part people forget. Love triangles are rarely tidy. George Harrison and Eric Clapton were friends, collaborators, fellow pilgrims in the strange world of genius. But behind the camaraderie, the house of marriage was creaking. Pattie Boyd was lonely. George Harrison was often elsewhere, spiritually, physically, emotionally. The ideal of devotion that shimmered on the surface of their life didn't always show up in the kitchen at midnight when she needed it most. Then came the betrayals that she says cracked her open. Fame brings proximity. Proximity brings temptation. Pattie describes George Harrison as a man who attracted attention easily and sometimes welcomed it too, readily. Flirtations blurred into affairs, and one day a wound. Discovering that George Harrison was involved with Maureen Starkey, Ringo Starr's wife. Think about that for a second. Not just infidelity, betrayal woven into the closest circle of friends. Imagine walking into your own home and finding the social world you trust has shifted under your feet. Some people like to tell the story of a guitar duel between Harrison and Clapton at Friar Park, George's estate. Two men arguing with solos, a conversation in notes sharper than any words they could bear to say. Whether it happened exactly that way or not, the point is clear. Music became the arena where feelings too messy for speech had to go somewhere. And for Pattie Boyd, the question stayed the same. Where do I fit in my own life? By 1974, she decided she couldn't live inside the shell of a beautiful marriage any longer. She left George Harrison, ending the chapter the world had painted into a fairy tale. But freedom, as she would learn, can open into a different kind of storm. Because Eric Clapton was still there, still burning, still convinced that the love he'd carved into vinyl could become love in real life. After Pattie and George's divorce was finalized, she and Eric became a couple. On March 27, 1979, they married in Tucson, Arizona. You'd think the world would boo. Instead, it kind of shrugged in a strangely affectionate way. George Harrison even came to the wedding, cracking a line that gave tabloids a field day. Only in rock and roll could that happen. A triangle turned into a crooked circle, everyone pretending the geometry made sense. For a minute, maybe it did. There's a relief when you stop chasing what you want and finally have it. But the trouble that haunts a person doesn't stay home just because love shows up. Eric Clapton had fought heroin and then dove headfirst into alcohol. The brilliance on stage didn't always make the man healthy off stage. Mood swings, disappearing acts, the kind of drinking that turns nights into sagas the next morning. Pattie Boyd had traded one kind of loneliness for another, this time sitting next to someone whose demons took up all the air in a room. And then there's the heartbreak the public didn't see. They wanted a family. They tried. Again. And again, IVF is clinical on paper and crushing in real life. Anyone who's been there knows the rhythm. Appointments, shots, hope that makes you float, disappointment that drops you with no warning. Pattie speaks about that period with words like humiliating, exhausting, devastating. It's the kind of suffering you can't dress up. It just is. While she was in that quiet, private battle, another blow landed. Eric Clapton had fathered a child, a little girl named Ruth, with Yvonne Kelly, a recording studio manager. Pattie Boyd learned about it while she was still in the tight loop of fertility treatments. Try to imagine the layered pain of that, the grief of a body that won't cooperate, the shock of a partner who looks you in the eye and asks you to keep hoping while building a secret life outside your home. And then, another child with Lori Del Santo, an Italian actress, while he and Pattie were still married. Life can be unsparing in its irony. The woman who inspired torch songs about devotion was being asked again and again to swallow betrayals dressed up as accidents. At some point, even the kindest heart taps out. By 1987, Pattie Boyd left. The divorce became official in 1989. The public, always hungry for an angle, tried to pick sides, but she wasn't interested in being anyone's hero or villain. She was done living inside someone else's myth. What happens after the storm is the part I find most compelling. Some people spend their later years clutching the greatest hits reel and telling the same 3 anecdotes at dinner. Pattie Boyd refused to do that. She went to therapy. She took the story out of the past tense and re-examined it in the present. She asked the questions that hurt. Why did I stay so long? Where did I go when I wasn't being seen? Who am I if I'm not somebody's muse? And then, this is where the artist in her reemerges, she started to create. Photography, once a private love, moved to the center of her life. She had the eye of someone who'd stood in the wings for years, watching moments bloom and vanish. Her photos weren't just famous person with famous person snapshots. They had intimacy, patience, a tenderness for the in-between. Exhibitions followed. Reviews didn't talk about her as the woman behind the men. They talked about craft, framing, light, story. She wasn't the subject anymore. She was the author. Writing came next. In 2007, she published a memoir that did what memoirs are supposed to do, tell the truth even when it's complicated. It wasn't a tabloid confessional. It was a reckoning. She wrote about the dizzying love, the deals you make with yourself to keep the peace, the private codes of big lives lived in public. People who'd only known the album covers met the human being. Some were shocked. Many were moved, not because celebrities behaved badly, which is hardly news, but because of how familiar her loneliness sounded. And yes, life finally gave her something gentler. In 2015, Pattie Boyd married Rod Weston, a man she'd known for years. No circus, just a quiet ceremony at Chelsea Old Town Hall. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do after a lifetime of drama is choose peace. She didn't need a soundtrack to validate it. She didn't need the world to approve. She just needed a life that fit her. So where does that leave us when we talk about her at 80? Not in a shrine to the 60s, not in a blame game either. In her recent reflections, Pattie Boyd is unsparing about what those marriages cost her. She speaks openly about the betrayals, about Eric Clapton's drinking and infidelities, about how the glamour didn't cancel out the grief. She owns the choices she made, even the ones she now questions. That honesty is the point. Reputation doesn't heal you. Truth does. And let's say the quiet thing out loud. The world is very good at celebrating women who inspire genius in men and less good at caring what happens to those women afterward. We love the idea of a muse, the delicate figure in the corner, the woman who opens a door in the man's mind and then waits while he walks through it. But muses have kidneys and calendars and careers. They have plans and talents and limits. Pattie Boyd's story is a reminder that being seen through someone else's art is not the same thing as being known. Was she unfairly treated? Here's a way to think about it. Imagine a long table filled with attention. One person takes most of it because the world pays him for what he can do on a stage. Another person learns to live on what's left. Over time, that creates a hunger. You can't fix that hunger with a hit single or a bouquet appearing at the door at 3 a.m. You fix it by offering presence, by making room for the other person's life, by resisting the gravitational pull of your own legend. If the people around you can't or won't do that, the love begins to feel like a performance in which you only have one line. And yet, there's a grace in the way Pattie Boyd tells it. She doesn't snap shut the story with a verdict stamped guilty. She tells it so we can understand the weather systems of fame, the way adoration rearranges priorities, the way addiction cancels good intentions, the way genius can be sincere and selfish at the same time. She also shows us what recovery looks like, not as a montage, but as a years of patient work, of rebuilding a self that doesn't need a famous echo to feel real. If you want a neat moral, here's what I hear. First, beauty, even famous beauty, won't save you from hard things. Second, love that asks you to disappear is too expensive. Third, telling your own story, especially when others have been telling it for you, is an act of courage that changes everything. At 80, Pattie Boyd is not the girl from the magazine or the woman in the chorus of someone else's song. She's the narrator now, and she's choosing clear sentences over pretty myths. So, what about those songs? Something. Layla. The world won't stop playing them, nor should it. They're magnificent. But I think the most interesting thing we can do is hear them differently. Hold the beauty of the music in one hand and the truth of the woman who inspired it in the other. Both can be true at once, that a love can set an artist on fire, and that the person on the other end of that blaze can get burned. Now I want to turn it to you. Do you think Pattie Boyd was wronged, or was she simply caught in a perfect storm of fame, desire, and bad timing? Do you see a love story that lost its way, or a pattern that was never going to end differently? And beyond the gossip, what lessons are here for anyone who's ever shrunk themselves to keep someone else shining? If this deep dive gave you a new angle on a story you thought you knew, do me a favor. Tap like so this conversation reaches more people who care about the human being behind the headlines. Hit subscribe if you want more true-life narratives told with honesty and heart, and ring that bell so you never miss what's next. Most of all, drop a comment. I read them, I learned from them, and I'm genuinely curious. When the music fades, what do we owe the people who helped make it? Thanks for listening, and for seeing Pattie Boyd not just as a muse, but as a woman who earned her own ending.